Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our guest lecture today. I am Leah, a TA here at LSAT Unplugged. I teach on Monday evenings for reading comprehension. So if you don't tune in already, you should definitely stop by. But today I'm here with Hamada. Am I saying that correctly?
You are.
Okay, perfect. And I just want to kind of give you guys a few minutes to learn a bit more about him as the founder of Right Track Admission. Would you mind giving us a little bit of your background, Hamada?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much to Steve and the team. You guys have been phenomenal. I think I did my first webinar with Steve back in 2019, and it's been a great experience working with him. And I'm very happy to see all the success of him and his team. By way of background for me, I graduated from UCLA, history major, poli-sci minor, many years ago, almost 20 years ago now. And then I decided to go to law school. When I applied, I had a great GPA, but my LSAT, unfortunately, Steve wasn't around 20 years ago, so I did not take his course. I took a competitor course and didn't do well my first time, canceled my score, did it again, got a 155, and then decided that my whole application is going to really rest on my ability to put together a phenomenal personal statement and diversity statement and so forth. So I spent from about July all the way through my submission dates, which were anywhere from October through December, perfecting my application. And then I submitted it and decided to retake the LSAT in December as a Hail Mary, as a final shot at it, and did even worse than I did the second time, unfortunately. And but was luckily, I think because of my application, able to get into one of my top choices, which was UC Berkeley for law school, where I went to law school. And because I'm a firm believer that the LSAT is not indicative of your ability to succeed in law school, not only was I in the law review and on the editorial board, but I graduated, passed the California bar the first time I took it, graduated with no debt from law school, and ended up working in corporate law, which is not let's say, a feather in the cap, but I guess it's what a lot of law students aspire to do. So I did that for about a year before starting Right Track, and then eventually working in international development with the US government. Now, throughout this whole period, from the time I started Right Track in 2008 all the way till now, we've grown considerably as a team. And we really hyper-focus, as is stated in our motto, which is discover your story, get admitted. We're all about story crafting, storytelling, ideating, and then putting it down on paper in a way that really allows the candidate to stand down and be proud of their candidacy and get over those admission humps to get into the top choice programs.
Well, I love that story, Hamada. I know that personally, I can relate to you in that I don't think I met Steve early enough. I got to work with him for 3 weeks between my first and second LSAT. And I had a 5-point increase in 3 weeks, which I'm was very happy about, but of course wish that I would have met him a little bit sooner and have a similar story to you, where my application essentially had to rest on my other credentials and paperwork, right? Aside from my LSAT score. So I can appreciate your story, and kudos to you on getting into one of your top schools and graduating with no debt. That's the ultimate dream, right? And I say this every interview that I do. I wish that I could have met the person that I'm interviewing sooner, so I could have utilized their expertise. But I'm happy to be here to introduce you to a lot of the students that we have here at LSAT Unplugged and students that I have in my class. I'm sure that I will be referring them to you here in just a few days.
Fantastic.
So what led you to want to help students get into law school? Was there like a defining moment that you had? Was it, I don't want to say that you struggled, but how you transformed your application and had to really pull through with the other stronger pieces, like a personal statement, your diversity statement, to get into these top schools? Was that your story that led you to found this consulting?
Yeah, I think it's even more than that. Back when I started considering applying to law school, I'll take you back to that road. It was back in 2002. The economy, for those that weren't even born then, that are going to school now in 2001, 2002, back then, the economy had crashed because of September 11th. And I was a history major, as I said, so I didn't have many opportunities or options. And I wasn't really business savvy per se. So law school to me seemed like the best option. I was, I guess, on all stereotypes, argumentative. I consider myself a decent writer because I was a history major. I consider myself to have a decent level of analytical skills because, again, I was a history major, so I had to analyze certain historical events and how they pertain to the present day and so forth. So I naturally gravitated towards law school as an option. I took the LSAT in December 02. And as I said, I canceled it. In June 2003, I took the LSAT again. As I said, I didn't do very well. And that's when I kind of leveraged a mentor of mine who was at UCLA Law at the time when I was an undergrad at UCLA. And he walked me through the application process itself and really was there instrumental to help me create my personal statement in a way that was pen dropping, that I knew. It's kind of like what we say now. What's the authenticity test for the right story? We have a kind of like a philosophy called the right story, and we have a uniqueness test and an authenticity test. The authenticity test is actually it's almost a physical test. And Leah, am I pronouncing right? Is that Leah?
Correct, yes.
So Leah, I'm sure you've been in those situations where you have an aha moment, where you get goosebumps, where kind of you feel a twinkle in your eye, where actually you sometimes even shed a tear. These are physical manifestations showing you that you've discovered something far bigger than you think. That is what you want to achieve when drafting your statement. With the help of my friend, I was able to achieve that and created a personal statement that even now, almost 20 years later, when I read it, it still resonates. In fact, let me add to that. That statement, Leah, prophetically ended up being exactly what I did 10 years later by working with the US government as a hyphenated identity, working as a bridge between two countries, one being the country of my heritage, one being my American identity, and providing international development law to benefit both countries. And that's exactly what I did when I worked with the US government under the Obama administration, which is what I had professed in my statement 10 years before. That's the power of the statement. The gentleman who helped me do that, eventually we became very good friends. And then I eventually worked with him to start the company in 2008. So the idea is that we both benefited. Well, I certainly much benefited from his assistance. And then we created the company as a mechanism to pay it forward and as a mechanism of showing what we learned in the process of helping me and helping others to make it into something that can almost formulaically apply to how you apply to school. And then since that 2008, what has it been, 14 years? I've been working to create mechanisms, almost like a formula. And I'm sure Steve would love this because that's how he thinks, right? It's about formulas and so forth. How you can really surface the best story to become the best personal statement, the best diversity statement, the best addendum, the best comprehensive application to really let you stand out as a candidate and either overcome hurdles, or if you're an exceptional candidate, give you that cutting edge. Because we're working with right now a client, get this, 173, 399 GPA from a top 20 undergraduate institution. I'm thinking, what are you thinking? Like, why, why? But the reality is we give them that little bit of extra finesse. Could that person get into a top 10 school on their own? Yes. Could they get into a top 5 school on their own? Possibly. But by working with us and really perfecting your application, not your personal statement, your application, you'll get into a top 5 or a top 10 with financial aid, which, as you can imagine, Leah, is a huge deal when your debt is about $100,000 a year.
Yes, absolutely. I know that for me personally, I got a scholarship from the institution that I'll be attending in the fall, and it did make the biggest difference. In my mind, I was like, oh, it doesn't matter how much it costs, I'm going to go where, and in the end, it can make a really big difference. And I want to say, it's so amazing what you did by you held out what you wrote about on your application and actually completed it. And I have students in my class that, again, I teach reading comprehension. However, I want them to ask me all the questions because I think that everyone's admissions process is an experience is different. I encourage them to ask the same questions to others that, work at LSAT Unplugged. And a lot of them will say, well, I don't know that I have this big aha moment. Like there isn't this big thing that happened in my life for me that made me want to be a lawyer. Some of my students do. I know that for myself, I didn't have, a moment in my life where I was like, this is just it. It was from almost a small instance that happened whenever I was younger that triggered my attention to being current events, and analyzing the history and how that, analyzing the past and how that relates to current events and future events. And that's how I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. So I try and explain to them that it doesn't have to be, what you put on your application. Most people don't get to meet you. So it's a, summary of who you are and the feeling that you want to give when someone reads it, right? So I think that this moment of goosebumps and tears and authenticity is so true, and something that I'm so glad that these students get to hear, because we can, you want to convey how you feel and make others feel the same way and be relatable, right? So I really appreciate your story and that you held out exactly what you said you wanted to do, right? It wasn't just something that you said to be impressive. You truly wanted to do it and obviously conveyed it well, and that it was authentic as you went and continued on to do it. So with that being said, what's the most challenging and or rewarding aspect of being involved in the admissions process?
I think you're probably going to know exactly what I'm going to say. I think the most challenging, yet one that we've really been able to perfect, but again, it's always a challenge because it's still personal, is finding that story buried within the person's life. And I think very similar to how you said it. Is there an aha moment? Yes. Related to law school? Probably not. In fact, authentically, most times it won't relate to law school. But there is an aha moment. There's no way you've lived 20, 25 plus years without an aha moment, without something seminal, without something that was really jarring in your head, whether it's a reaction to something, whether it's an experience on your own. I think in the end of the day, there's going to be an aha moment. And for us, the most difficult part, the most challenging part is unraveling that, especially among candidates that are naysayers to themselves, that don't believe they have it. And so you've got to really dig deep and suss it out, like really surface it, and then draw that story to make it all kind of come together authentically. That's the most challenging part. And I'll add this, the second most challenging part, which doesn't really impact us that much, but I can see how it can impact a lot of other candidates, is just time management, is making sure that the person is not getting distracted by life and gets their application out. For example, we're working with clients literally as we speak, and we're in July, with the goal of getting their application done by the middle of August to give them about a month so that they can then knock out the September LSAT. Psychologically, I'm a firm believer that if you have a solid application behind you, you're going to walk into that exam even more amped to crush it. Versus if you go into the exam, are fearful of the results, and then end up not doing well and then coming out and having a half-baked application because you don't even feel convinced that you're going to get into a top school. So I think that's the challenge, is time management and finding the story. The reward, obviously, as you can imagine, is the endless amount of times. And I would say not even them getting into school, but right now, again, I'll give you even a better one. I had one of my clients that I worked with back in 2009. So it was like even the first year that Right Track had come to being. And this gentleman, he still recalls the story. It's on our website, where I was walking by, saw him. He was going through, his brother was going through a very fatal illness. So he wasn't very motivated, because a lot of what you do for law school to get your application, you've got to be in the right headspace. So I just sat him down and pumped him. He was a good friend of mine from Berkeley, where I went to law school, and really pumped him up. And he put together an application. He's really proud of it, and thankfully got into NYU law. And 12 years later, came back to me and offered his services to be one of my experts.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, get out of here. Can you think about that? Like, think about how full circle, when we first started Right Track, this guy got through. He ended up working at one of the top law firms in America, ended up doing a lot of great things along his whole path of the last decade, and then ended up coming back to help serve clients just like we do. So that's true and utter bliss for us, and why we keep doing it.
Absolutely. I can imagine. I know that it's always great to hear positive feedback and the impact. I think that the greatest thing you can do in life is make an impact on someone else. You know, what we leave behind is, to me, not what is engraved on stone monuments, but, you know, what's like woven into the lives of others. So I love that, you know, those full circle moments, I can agree, are some of the greatest things in life. And I think you would agree. So can you tell me what it takes to stand out among other talented candidates?
So a number of factors. First of all, the application itself. So other than having incredible life experiences, look, a lot of people who are going to come to us are going to come to us with their life baked. They're not going to be able to live their story when they're working with us, right? Because our story has already been lived. Now they're telling it. Versus candidates that would talk to us when they're freshman or junior, or decide to take a year out and then have a year or two to kind of build up the gaps in their profile, grades, lack of volunteer experiences, lack of leadership, not very good letters of recommendation. So they'll have a year or two to really work on those. But those candidates are coming to us and saying, listen, I'm applying this year and it's September and they've got to have their application out in November. There's nothing they're going to do that has not already been done that they're going to have to write about. So let's use those guys as an example. The ones whose lives have already been baked and now they're telling the story that they've lived. So I would imagine the way to really stand out is that you've got to really dig deep, find the story, put it in the personal statement, recognize that what you have in the personal statement should not be duplicated in the diversity statement, but only complemented, and not use the diversity statement as just a supplemental statement of any trivial thought, but it really needs to be a deep thought out piece about diversity and inclusion, how you add to it and so forth. Then having a spectacular, non-excuse, but more explanation oriented addendum for any weaknesses in your application, and then having a stellar resume to kind of catch everything together. So imagine your resume as the foundation, and imagine the personal statement as this. So imagine the resume as the earth below, the personal statement as the foundation, the diversity statement as the walls, and the addendum as the roof. Each one has to complement the other. Obviously, the personal statement is the most important, but without a solid addendum, you could really put yourself in big trouble, because you'll have gaps and holes that they want explained. And kind of like you said in the beginning, you're not going to have an opportunity to get interviewed. So everything really has to come out in that application as a whole. So the way you really stand out is having that dynamic application and story that can really be put together well. Now, if you're going to ask me, well, how do you stand out as an applicant for those who are a year or two out from applying to law school? That's where you really want to play up all the volunteer work you've done and make sure there's an element of continuity. The volunteer, the leadership, the professional, academic, all leading towards an end goal of a type of law that you ideally want to practice, if you know, or at least the legal field. So there's a semblance of continuity. That's important.
So I know you just talked about timeline, and I just want to touch quickly on, is there a sweet space or a sweet time that you think to start beginning the application process, beginning studying for the LSAT? I know that you mentioned that you like your clients to have their application and all of its materials essentially done before the exam, because it brings on a confidence when they walk into the exam. And I can completely agree. So what do you think that timeline should essentially look like?
Ideally, June, July, you're already thinking about your statement and putting down ideas. You're taking the LSAT in August, September. You're submitting your application October. Latest before Thanksgiving. The best way I can tell you, and this is one of the mnemonics that I created, that we've created many, but it's a lingering from law school and from the bar exam. So here's a mnemonic for you. STARS. First piece of the puzzle is your story. Once you figured out your story, two things happen: confidence and the idea of why you want to go. So not only now do you know, if you've designed your story, you know that law school is for you, because you're about to commit 3 years of your life and $300,000. So you need to know. So the first step in the equation is figure out your story. And if your story adds up to what you want to do, then T is test prep. Then line up what you're going to be thinking about in terms of, are you going to go to LSAT Unplugged and get their services? How long do you need with them? Are you going to get a private tutor? Are you going to try to do it on your own? How many diagnostics are you going to take? So you want to have a plan of action and think about your test prep. Then A is application materials. And that really is gathering your resume, letters of recommendation, right? Getting together and signing up to LSAC, right? Getting all the components together, starting to figure out which school, like not just which schools, but figuring out everything that the application is going to require. So gathering all the materials, especially the resume, putting it together. Then R is those recommendations. So now that you've gathered the application materials, R is for recommendations. Start soliciting your recommendations. And then finally, schools, S. And that really means go in there and start figuring out what are your reach, target, and safety schools. Once you've mapped out STARS, that should honestly start to take you about a month and a half. By the time you finish STARS, you're ready to start the application, if that makes sense. So STARS is your runway, and that should take a month and a half, and that should really start at the beginning of June. So figure out your storyline, the talk track of your life, figure out what test prep you're going to do, gather the application materials, start looking and getting recommendation letters, figure out what schools you're going to apply to, begin the process.
So if there is hypothetically a student that may be falling behind on this timeline and is not, is determined to apply in this next cycle, and, whether that's attend or wait another year, do you have any advice for that individual?
So whether to take a year out or to apply Hail Mary, and what's fall behind, like they decide to apply in December, January?
Yes.
Yeah. And we've had many clients like that. This year may have been one of the hardest administrative cycles. So props to you for getting into one of your top choices, because I think a lot of applicants had difficulty this year because a lot of people deferred. And there was definitely, and because the economy is looking like a little bleak, so people want to step out from work, use this time to study so that when the economy picks back up, they're going to have been fully credentialed to be lawyers and ride the wave, right?
Sure.
So I think this season was tough. To answer your question, those guys are coming in December, January, unless you have a blockbuster LSAT and a really compelling story, you may want to wait the year out and not apply, or apply, get denied, but go through the process so you know what it's like, so that when you start it up again, your brain's already fully activated. And now you're going to get your application in around August. I have a client we're literally working or recently worked with, applied last year, got into a top 14, grades were phenomenal, decided to reapply. Didn't even defer, just decided to do a great job in the interim period that's going to add to his application, and then reapply to get into even a better school. So there is no holding you back. Look, in the end of the day, whether you start at 22 or 23, it's not going to make a huge difference. I took 2 years out. After graduating in 2002, I started law school in 2004, and it didn't make much of a difference. In fact, it didn't make a difference at all, because even during law school, I took a year out, did a master's in England, came back to law school, and graduated at 29. And it didn't really impact my career whatsoever. In fact, I think it helped it, because by the time I graduated, I was mature, I knew what I wanted to do, and I jumped straight into it. So to answer your question, for those guys who are really delinquent, and unless they have spectacular scores, you can apply and then use that as a test case to reapply the following year, or take a year out, but recognizing that year out, maximize the experience, the time, so that you can use it as a leverage point when you reapply. I took a year out, here's what I did. Wow. As opposed to I took a year out and did nothing.
And my second hypothetical is, let's say that a student didn't get into one of their top schools, but is still determined, to go to law school. They got in somewhere, they're going to go, and are considering transferring. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice? I know that a lot of people told me this is a completely different ball game in terms of it's based off of your first year grades in law school. What else should they be focused on in, trying to transfer? Do you also specialize in that?
It's very few students transfer. Not many do. In the end, it's probably, I want to say, depending on the school, but the top 5% probably will transfer or have the opportunity to transfer. I don't think 5% of every class of 400, that would be, what is that? 40, 30, 20 people. Is that right? 40, yeah, 20 people would be transferring. I'd say that's about right. In the class of 400, about 20 would transfer out. So it's not a huge number. Typically, when they're in that process, they're already so deep in the process, they don't usually seek admissions advice. But I do know of people who have. I transferred between undergraduate schools. So I've done it myself. But my advice to them is there is only one piece of advice, and that you have to get into the top 5 of your class.
Okay.
Is it easier to be top 5 of your undergraduate class and top 5 of your law school? Definitely. To be in your top 5 of your law school is exceptional. And the chances of you being top 5 in your present school and top 5 in your transfer school is high. So a lot of the people who transfer end up being some of the top students at the transferee school, at the school that they go to. So the only advice is you've got to crush it during your first year. That's it. While if you apply as a 1L, you've got your application, your LSAT, your GPA. There's so many other factors that go into it. But as a transferee, it's really going to come down to your GPA, number 1, number 2, your recommendations, possibly a distant number 3. What did you do during your first year? That really that shows that you're well-rounded. But even that is not, they expect that you're going to be putting all your time to get the best grades possible.
And is this timeline, a transfer timeline, similar, would you say, than a regular admissions timeline? Or is it almost delayed? I know that a lot of that action typically happens in the spring.
Exactly. That's exactly right. It's usually in the spring, so that the schools that you're transferring into have more than just a first semester grades, but they're going to wait for your second semester grades as well. So
how has COVID impacted the admissions experience? I know that I'm hoping we're on the tail end of this pandemic, right? But just in terms of the students that you worked with prior and then now, I know we've kind of touched on there's not really interviews anymore. Are there any other key differences that you've noticed?
In terms of the application process or the experience for law students?
Both. You can speak on both.
The latter, I have less of knowledge, obviously, because I'm not in law school per se. So I don't really know except for what we do know from others, from what we read in the news and so forth, which is that people are doing studies remotely, which for law school, honestly, is not a horrible thing now that I think about it, compared to like business school, which is all about hardcore networking. But in law school, especially your first year, whether you're at home studying like crazy or in the library studying like crazy and taking classes in person or online, I don't think it's a horrific experience. I mean, the experience first year sucks anyway. So whether you're doing it from home or in the classroom, I don't think it's that different. I think it would be towards your second, third year of law school where you've now made friends and you want to start working on a journal and you want to like do a clinic and you want to see people and so forth. To answer the former, like I said, I think the last 2 years, especially this last cycle, was one of the most difficult, because if the pandemic smashed in 2020, people applied in 2020, right? And may have been admitted for the fall 21 cycle and then decided, schools are still closed, I'm going to defer for fall 2022, which means that a lot of seats were already filled and preoccupied by people who deferred. So there were less seats available, which meant the competition was even stiffer. Now, because the economy is on the down, I think also people, as I said, are trying to weather out the economy by going to law school, and hoping that by the time they graduate with the credentials as a lawyer, they'll be able to have an exceptional job when the economy is improving. So I think it's more from an admissions perspective, it's made it more difficult than previous years.
Sure. So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit and ask you, do you think, I know from your personal experience, I know the partial answer to this question, that a well-written admissions essay can make up for a lower LSAT score? If so, or if not, what does?
Well, you know the answer to that. I have to believe that is going to be the case. As I said, I graduated near top of my class at UCLA because I chose a major that I loved. So that was very helpful, history and poli-sci. So I knew that my GPA was definitely going to benefit me. But my LSAT was such an aberration that I knew it was going to impact my ability to apply. So I knew that when the admissions committee, and trust me, it definitely proved this way, schools who are very sensitive for having a high LSAT immediately dinged me flat off the bat. But I needed to squeeze myself into a maybe pile. That was my goal. I'm like, I need to get into a maybe pile. The only way I can do that is I have to have a high GPA that would be like, nah, the guy's LSAT is not great, but his GPA is exceptionally high. Let's take a look at his application. Let's take a look, that extra step, then you better seize that opportunity with everything you've got. And that's really where I said, I just need to get put into that maybe pile so somebody can look at my application and I'm off to the races. And that's how I got into Berkeley, right? I was also waitlisted to schools like Columbia, Georgetown, and others. But ultimately I decided to go to Berkeley for my schooling. But I have to say, it really will come down to your application, because honestly, Leah, this is the only thing that you will have control of after your LSAT is done, because your GPA is done, your recommendations are in, your LSAT is in. So what's in your control? What can you control today? And that's going to be how well you think through and write your personal statement, your diversity statement, your addendum.
Sure, I absolutely agree. So to kind of touch on, I know we briefly spoke of interviews and how they don't really exist anymore. I know for me personally, schools like Vanderbilt, you could opt in to an interview or request one. What are the benefits of applicants seeking those calls when aiming to apply to these law schools? Do you find that they're generally pretty helpful, or is it almost so-so?
They're like vitamins, but they're not antibiotics. If you don't do them, you're not gonna die. If you do them, it's a vitamin and it's gonna help. But if you do them and you don't do well in them, it's not gonna be helpful. It's going to be a rotten vitamin.
I like that analogy. That was a great way to put it.
So I'm a firm believer. I'm a huge believer of high EQ in any applicant. I think being in law school and being uberly socially not, how do I put it in a nice way, socially not inept, where you can socialize, because as a lawyer, you're a zealous advocate. Even if you're a zealous advocate for a law firm, you're still going to interface with someone. You're not stuck in a hole. You're not a lab rat. So you have to have good people skills, good and strong EQ. Those interviews will test that. So if you have that as your as a natural strength, then definitely do it. If you don't, then I advise you to rehearse for it. If you don't think you can still rehearse for it, then I say don't do it. But I would recommend people to do it because it's just a great opportunity for the school to see you and fall in love with you. And as I said, it could be a really exceptional vitamin.
Absolutely. So if a student is nervous to reach out to an admissions office, whether, it would be regarding an interview or just looking for advice, or students who need additional information, what would you tell them? I know that it's almost a complicated question, and like, what advice would you give to someone seeking advice from an admissions office? But do you have any intel on or motivation for those students to reach out?
Well, are you reaching out for advice from the admissions committee, or are you reaching out to just, I guess, get a sense of the school, almost interview them? Because if it's advice from AdCom, it depends. Like, do you have a question to ask? Is it specific? In the end of the day, AdCom, those law school fairs are a great way of interfacing with AdCom up to a point, and getting to know people without feeling awkward, because that's what they're there for. It's like speed dating. You're going from table to table, talking to each school, getting a sense of it. I definitely leverage that, especially for Berkeley, because I got to know the dean of admissions that way. And so he saw my application come through. It was very benefit. I mean, he knew who I was and read through it. And I think that's how I ended up in the maybe pile. And then the maybe pile converted to admission. So the advice is have a reason for contacting them, not be clueless. If you can go to the school and start with, hey, I really am intrigued by your school. I wanted to know how I can audit a class or get a tour, and start that way. It's an ask, it's a gentle ask, and it's one that they should be able to accommodate fairly easily, right? You're not coming to them saying, hey, what are my chances of admission if I have these scores? What are they going to tell you? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, apply. Worst case for them, they just got $100 and whatever from your application fee. So they don't care. So they're going to be like, apply. Because if they're like, yeah, no, you're really, I mean, you've got to have bad scores for them to say that. So typically they're going to be like, you know what? Hail Mary, shoot for the stars, land on the moon, right? But ultimately come with an ask that makes sense. Like, I want to check out the school. I want to do a tour. Can you connect me with any current students so I can just get a better sense of the campus? That's critical. Because the way that we design the personal statement, I don't know if you're going to ask me about how to write an effective personal statement. I don't know if that's in the cards today, because I have a mnemonic and a structure for that. But essentially, the penultimate paragraph of your personal statement, the second to last paragraph, could be used to describe why that law school. And in doing so, that's where you really want to basically flex the fact that you've talked to somebody in the admissions committee, talked to current students, talked to alumni, talked to professors, audited a class, took a virtual tour, checked out the campus.
Well, now that to pivot a little bit, because you've done a nice segue.
Like that? It's that's what we call a reverse
I love that.
question. I planted it to you so that you can hit it back to me.
Well, I wanted to ask, but again, I didn't want you to have to give away your magic for free here.
No, I want you to.
Any magic you can give to us in terms of how to write this personal statement, this diversity statement, these optional essays. That's my first question. And before I forget, because I've thought of this before, some schools, at least I can remember, didn't even want my personal statement, right? And for me, that was ouch. Oh my gosh, I just spent all this time perfecting this. And they had these essays. I think if I remember correctly, it was the University of North Carolina, I believe. And you had to write, they had 4 essays and you had to write at least 2 of them. So do you have any advice on, how to tackle those? Because as you know, not everyone is probably filling out every application with the price that they are at the same time. So if this happens, almost later in the timeline of what you said, what is your advice on that as well?
Woo, loaded, tons of stuff going on.
Yeah.
So let's start in the reverse. So optional statements, University of North Carolina, that is an aberration. I'm yet to see that happen. The only essay that I'm seeing as an additional essay is why school essay. And that's coming up a lot. A lot of schools are saying, why our school?
Sure.
And we have a whole mnemonic for that. And I can walk you through that one. The other optional one, if there's any optional statements, read optional as required, mandatory, because it's just another opportunity for you to flex who you are and provide that to them, especially if you don't get an interview. And how do you approach that? You're going to have to approach it exactly like any personal statement. It's going to not be great because you're going to write a personal statement, which you have to, but then also work on those. But the good news is it's almost impossible that you can't take parts of the personal statement and tweak it to answer at least one of those 2 questions. I know for LLMs, masters in law, there will be specific questions that are only pertinent to the certain school. For example, Harvard asks a legal question and you've got to analyze it. So again, but for JDs, that really is not the case. So what you're saying is a real aberration, except for the why our school essay, which does come out a lot and more now. Panning back to how do you answer the personal statement, we have something called the ABC. And I won't get into all the nitty gritty, but we have a YouTube channel. Hopefully you guys can get the link to that. It's just Right Track Admissions. You just type that into YouTube and you'll see that we have tons of videos, over 100 videos. Obviously, we don't rival LSAT Unplugged. You guys are a machine with videos and amazing free content. But we try to also provide our fair share of free content. I think I was motivated by what Steve was doing and want to spread the knowledge to those out there that won't be working with us, but still need the help to get into school. So we have something called the ABC of the personal statement. A, attention grabber. B, background. C, career. D, direction. E, educational institution. And F, finale. A, attention grabber, like a movie. It's the start of the scene. It's what captivates. It sets the context. It's what pulls them into your story. It captivates them. If we started the movie of Leah, what are we going to have on the screen to engage the audiences as they're shoving popcorn in their mouth and not disengaging them, right? B, background, that's really going to be the authenticity portion. That's who are you? How did you grow up? What were your life experiences? That leads into C. And C is answering the fundamental question, given who you are, what have you been doing about it? That linkage is pure authenticity, right? Because what is authenticity? It's living by who you are. If you believe in immigration rights, you did something about it. If you believe in, no abortions, what did you do about it? If you believe in civil rights, what do you do about it, right? Not just saying, I believe in it, and then you have nothing to do with that. Or you live the counter, which is even worse, right? So C is your career. Career is academic and professional. And that's really what you want to showcase, what you've been doing with who you are. D, direction. And that tells you, given who I am and what I've been doing about it, this is where I want to go. And really, it's just teeing off why law school makes sense for you. Finally, you say, now, given where I want to go to law school, or I want to go to law school, that leads into E, educational institution. And that's where we talked about that, about why school, why that school. Sometimes it's a specific standalone statement, and sometimes it's just a paragraph. For that, we have another mnemonic, CLAP, community, location, academics, personal. So you want to think about all of those 4 components as they fit into E, educational institution. And that's the community. What's the campus like? I'm sure when you went to the campus that you're going to, you saw it, you liked it. It was quaint versus city. It was large versus small. You know what I'm saying? So it's all about the community. Location is saying, I want to practice in Los Angeles, So being at UCLA is critical. I want to be near these jobs. I want to be in a bigger city environment, right? Then you have academics, the obvious. That's the clinics, the professors, the courses, the concentrations. And then you have the personal. And that's the, I spoke with the students. I spoke with the professor. I visited the campus, right? That's the personal, the X factor, the thing that ties you closely to that school and distinguishes you as a candidate. And then finally, F, finale. And that, like any good movie, you want to bring resolution to the beginning of the whole thing. So if it's a story arc, you've got the context, or you set the scene, then you have character development, story development, crescendo, or the conflict. A decision needs to be made. You decide law school. The law school that you're applying to is going to be your guide to get you on to your end goal, to your end result of where you want to end up.
I love that. As you were speaking through each of the points, I was thinking of my personal statement and how they related. So I think I meant most of the points. So that was good. That was a good reassurance to hear. I know I'm done with the process now, but
the good way of doing this is that you don't forget any fundamental point in the personal statement and the development of it. So there's going to be people that are going to be like, "But Leo, I don't even know where to start." Just start putting down the A, B, C, D, E, F on a page, and then start putting in bullet points for each one. Then make those bullet points sentences, then make those sentences into paragraphs. And now take out the headers, and you've got a rough draft of a personal statement, condense it, make sure the transitions flow. You're off to the races.
And I love how your points are each interconnected, like they flow into one another and it makes sense. It's not, from A to C to F to D to, I can appreciate that as well. And I think that helps with constructing the paper. So before I forget, I want to ask you a question. It was about, okay, so the big no-no of the question every school asks now, why this school? And the big no-no of writing a generalized why and then just fine-tuning, tailoring for it to fit. What should you include in these why papers? Like, what specifics should you be finding out about the schools, maybe aside from, class size or what they're really what programs specifically they're, whether that be like entertainment law, for example, that they really specialize in or excel in. What other details should you be including in these why papers?
I mean, look, in the end of the day, there's going to be a point where you're not going to be able to do a solid why for every school, that you cannot find something that's really unique that speaks to you. And that shouldn't turn you off and say, well, maybe the school's not right for me. It just so happens that you just don't have a connection to that school. But essentially you want to have, the strongest why essays that I've seen, the ones I wrote, were ones I really had a strong connection with the school, whether I'm an alum of that school, whether I've taken a class at that school, whether I've visited the campus, whether I've talked to students, where I got the insider, the skinny on what makes them great. Like, that's kind of what makes, why admissions consultants are great, because if you're working with a consultant that's gone to one of the schools that you want to go to, you're going to get the skinny on that school. You're going to find everything you need on it. But essentially, you're right. It's not going to be just the class size and the stuff you can find on any website. It's that je ne sais quoi. It's that something that really kind of speaks to you. It's the fact that maybe it's the historical significance of that school. It's what they do in the community. It's what the professors are known for and how you want to study underneath them, because that's an area of interest of yours, right? It's that clinic that really speaks to you, death penalty clinic, international law clinic, immigration clinic, right? That just fits squarely what you do. But if you write, I really want to go to Harvard because they've got a great contract law and transactional law program. Well, a lot of schools have a lot of great contracts program, torts, constitutional law, right? So you really want to find that thing that makes that more unique. And if you're struggling and you have the opportunity, take a virtual tour, spend a day and just do virtual tours of each school and start writing things down of that school that really stands out for you. Now you've got the juice of what makes it really stand out. And that's going to be a critical part of the application.
So do you think there's a student that is a right fit, that there's a right fit law student?
I think the analytical skills that are required by law school, or the skills required, oratory, writing, analysis, right? empathy in some ways, if you have those engendered in what you've done in your life, the studies you've had, the professional experiences you had, life experiences, that will make you a real standout candidate and make you a right fit as a law student.
So
but there is no right fit, right? Because Leah, you can imagine law students, and you just Google this, find out the makeup of a class of what majors people take to go to law school. It's pretty fascinating. There's a big chunk of STEM, which you would never imagine, engineers, science, math, right?
Right.
Then you're going to have your boilerplate, politics, government, history. Then you're going to have your sociology, comms, languages, literature, you name it. People have done it and ended up in law school. People have changed careers and ended up in law school. There is no prerequisites. There is very few schools that offer pre-law as a major. Given that, there cannot be a stereotypical perfect candidate. But if you have those 4 key analytical skills, those 4 key characteristics and qualities, again, oratory skills, writing skills, and analytical skills, and strong sense of empathy, then I think you're going to be well suited, whether you're an engineer or whether you're a philosophy major.
I appreciate that you touched on all the different majors, you know, that get to law school. Personally, my first 3 years of undergrad, I was a biology pre-medicine major. And then it was COVID for me that brought it all for a full circle. And I was like, this is not what I want to do with my life. And I changed my major and I became, you know, a legal studies pre-law major, and everything really turned around for me and I loved it. But one thing that I noticed was how differently individuals think in the various classes that I took, like the process of thought in STEM majors, the process of thought in philosophy and sociology majors, the thought process of those in my legal studies and administration of justice majors, right? Like they were all vastly different, but again, new people that wanted to go to law school. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
And that's the beauty of the diversity and why law schools love diversity, because they want diversity of major as well. They don't want just a bunch of government or just a bunch of engineers. They want, because you're taking ideas of policy and society, putting it into a class, putting a legal framework around it, and then having people discuss it and understand why historically it's been that way and where it's going.
Absolutely.
So having people who represent a cross section of society is critical.
Absolutely. So do you have any admission tips for non-traditional students? I know a few moments ago you mentioned those who've been, you know, in the professional sector and have been in the workforce. And do you ask them to hone in almost on those skills just a little bit more than maybe someone who is coming directly out of undergrad applying to law school?
Yeah, I mean, again, I was one of them because I definitely wasn't untraditional. I just took a gap year or 2 years. But those who are, let's say, untraditional, like they're older candidates or come from a very different field that may not necessarily stand out for law school, you know, don't shy from it. It's going to probably should form a good, strong part of your diversity statement, at least, because that's going to be something that's going to distinguish you. So I wouldn't hide from it. It's got to be discussed. It's the elephant in the room and you want to discuss it. You know, if you're, as I said, an older candidate, somebody coming from a field that does not seem to be relatable to law, you know, if you had even, you know, certain trials and tribulations, make sure that you include it in the application and speak to it, address it, explain it, and make it as part of one of the things that makes you stand out and makes you unique.
I love that. So I want to give you a few moments, you know, before I talk about how our students can reach you at Right Track Admissions, just give you an opportunity to speak on anything that maybe we didn't cover yet today.
I mean, not really, as much as I always want to implore people, just off the top of my head, to think through each component of the application. When you start brainstorming and thinking, write down all the things that make you who you are, unique, stand out, any issues in your life, put them all down. And then start thinking about which one of those ideas, those concepts are going to go into which part of the application process. Literally, take them, put them on a whiteboard, cross them out, put them saying the personal statement's going to cover these 3 points: diversity, addendum, everything else will go in the resume. This is the why of the school. And the ones that don't stand out, don't try to shove them in there to make them stand out. They don't work, and cut them out. I was just working with a client that had two ideas representing the same concept that we were trying to bring and to surface. The first one came in the opening, which is exactly what I wanted. The second idea came out of nowhere and was shoved into the background. I'm like, this is duplicative. Now you're throwing everything in the kitchen sink, trying to make the same point twice with two different experiences. Don't do it. You distract. Focus on the idea, the pivot, the anchor, and then explain in other ways that complements that, not adds yet another story, talk track, another storyline. And never neglect the addendum. Absolutely important. It was pivotal for me. I studied abroad. I was an international student. I went to a British school. I took the SATs and did horrific. I did exceptionally well in undergrad. I took the LSAT, did horrific. And my argument was, I'm going to do well in law school. Don't let that be why I would not be admitted. Explaining that really helped turn the tide and got me into one of my top choices. So don't shy by explaining, providing evidence, but don't make excuses, and make that definitely the crux of your addendum. Don't skip that. It's a very important part of your application.
I love that. And so a final question on my end before we talk about contact information is, would you agree to an extent that it's not necessarily what you're writing about, but how you're writing it, how you're speaking on it? Would you agree?
Yeah, look, yeah, to an extent. Look, in the end of the day, I did tell you that this is a cathartic process. It's emotional. If it's not emotional and you're stoic, then you're not doing the right job, especially for law school. I can't tell you how many times my clients have cried, teared up, choked up, went from like 0 to dopamine shot through the roof because they recognize that they're onto something. It's gotta be heartfelt. If it's not, then you're not doing the right thing. And if the school doesn't accept you and you've put all your heart into it, then that wasn't the school for you. So it's got to come from the heart. And that's why it has to take time. It can't be rushed. You've got to sit down. It's a therapeutic, cathartic process. And maybe at the end of it, you'll recognize law school is not for you. But if it is, then make it into a therapeutic process that you can then put on the page, as long as it all comes together beautifully.
Well, thank you so much. So how can our students reach you at Right Track Admissions?
That's it. Just go to www.righttrackadmissions.com. And we have a little quiz there. You can fill it out, or you can just contact us, info@righttrackadmissions. If you don't go to our website, you can call us at 888-RIGHT-TRACK. We can provide you guys with that number. I don't even know if people are calling anybody anymore. And obviously you can find us. We're on Instagram, Facebook, for those who are old school. I'm still shy from TikTok, but we're dabbling in that. I don't know if Steve jumped into that. If he has, and I'm going to. What I'm most proud of is YouTube, because I've had to record all those videos myself and edit them myself. And we've got a ton of content on literally 90% of what we talked about today, from how to write a perfect resume, diversity statement addendum, how to get the best letter of recommendation if law school is for you, how to write a great personal statement, pretty much everything that you're going to need to know, including how I was able to graduate law school with no debt, which helped me tremendously in my life, because I started Right Track. And now I've been working for myself for the last X amount of years, because I don't have that overhanging debt to weigh me down, to put me in those golden handcuffs. And I think I've been very, very lucky to have done that.
Well, I will be sure to share your information, and even more specifically your YouTube page, with my students this coming Monday whenever I host my class. But I want to thank you so much again for sharing your tips and tricks on, story crafting and editing and perfecting. And I'm very hopeful that a lot of our students will utilize what you spoke of here today, and hopefully contact you for more information and help on their application.
I appreciate it, Leah. I always appreciate it to Steve and the team for having me year on year, and wishing you guys the best of luck, wishing you the best of luck as a 1L. And thank you very much. And we look forward to hopefully hearing from some of your students and happy to provide them with more information and guidance.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.